Okay, welcome everyone. I'll now call the committee of the whole meeting to order. The territorial acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge with respect the history and living culture of the Shinnebec, the people of the Three Fires known as the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. We recognize that these lands are the territories of the Chippewas of Saugeen, the Chippewas of Nawash, collectively known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the keepers of this land. Georgian Bluffs is located in the lands encompassed by treaties 45.5, 67, 72, 82, and 93. We reflect on our role as treaty people, and we need to live in respect and peace, but to show respect to the First Peoples who inhabit these lands and waters. Adoption of the agenda. Will the agenda be approved as presented? Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Day. Nothing more on that. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? No discussion? Good. There's Isaac's on there now. Declaration of pecuniary interest. Does any member wish to declare a pecuniary interest? Not seeing one. Oh, yeah, Councillor Thompson.
I think I'll need to declare a conflict when we come to approve the minutes of the closed meeting. 4.2.
No, you're in special
You
counsel. You need to be committee of the whole.
Never mind. I'll get on.
Right,
I'll get on the
right.
right page here.
Thanks for testing me there, Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought I was ahead of the game.
Committee of the whole.
Announcements. Announcements. Councillor Coburn is announcing.
I just wanted to wish a happy Nurses Week to all the nurses out there and to thank them for all of their hard work and dedication and commitment to the health and well-being of our residents and their communities.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other announcements to be made?
I don't this week.
Nothing this
I'll
week?
catch up.
Okay, perfect. All right, we're moving on to public participation. 6.1, presentations. Any person who wishes to make a presentation to council must register with the clerk at least 7 days in advance of the scheduled meeting. To register, you can call and you can complete the online delegation form, www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations, or you can call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 601. And tonight, we do have Grey County Affordable Housing in the building here. We have Liz to present. And once we have Liz's presentation, we can ask her some questions if needed. Come on up, Liz.
In terms of our communication, whatever works for me. Okay, wonderful. Well, we'll wing it. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today. And the intention is to talk a little bit about housing affordability in action. I'll maybe just use that key there. If we can just advance to the next slide as well, that would be great. Okay, so a little levity. I don't know if I got the avatar quite right, but that's me. I'm Liz Buckton, Senior Policy Planner with Grey County. Just a brief agenda. We'll kind of start with the broad scoping or framing of the housing issues that we're facing. Work through some discussion around municipal roles and the agency that we have to address issues like this. We'll speak a little bit about the housing action plan of the county. And then we'll look at a little bit of data around the local picture and kind of foreshadow some next steps perhaps for Georgian Bluffs. Next slide, please. Okay. So, wow, there's a lot of words on that one. That is intentional. And so I won't go through each of those elements, and I know you have had the slides to have a look at previously. But really the takeaway that I wanted to share here is just that there are a broad range of factors that affect housing supply and affordability. We can view that as a system where there are a lot of levers that need to be aligned to get an outcome from that system. And a lot of those levers are outside of our local scope of control. So when we're talking about solution finding, we really are looking at what we have jurisdiction over, what we can influence. Some of that falls directly in our sphere of control. Some of that is through our influence. So advocacy, for example, is one of the tools that we can use to move a bit beyond that. But ultimately, being a multifactorial issue, what I want you to remember from this slide is that there is no one silver bullet solution, of course. And so that really is looking at doing what we can in our sphere of control to align the levers that we can towards the outputs that we'd like to see. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off just a little bit with some discussion around municipal roles. There's a lot of different perspectives, I think, on whose responsibility is what when it comes to housing. And so I'll put some ideas out there for consideration. Grey County operates as the housing service manager. So for the provincial framework for subsidized and social support housing. We carry that out and deliver housing units that are affordable across the county. We've got about 1,500 units that we administer. Some of them are directly our units. Some of them are through partnership with nonprofits. And that service is partially funded by the province. I would note that our supply of those affordable units is somewhat challenged. And you may have heard statistics otherwise, but we have seen our waitlist grow substantially through and since the pandemic. I think it's around a 250% increase in the waitlist over that time. And we're currently sitting just shy of 2,300 households across Grey County on that list. Based on the last reporting from the Housing Services Manager, we understand that equates to approximately a 5-year waitlist on average for an eligible household waiting for placement. So that does speak to the county role. What is the municipal role? Relevant question for today. And what I would say to that is, I think it is evolving. The discussion around what that role might be is evolving. But at its core, there are some places where that is embedded as an idea within our framework. And so firstly, I'll just point out the Planning Act. So certainly within that document, the province lists all of their provincial priorities and charges municipalities with some responsibilities in terms of having regard for those responsibilities. So we need to be aware of those priorities and also prioritize those things. And that full range of housing supply is one of those things that we're to prioritize. Next slide, please. That's also embedded in policy. And so the Provincial Planning Statement 2024, as an example, looks at that through the lens of planning authorities, as we are. And it really focuses there, identifying that we shall provide for an appropriate range and mix of housing options by doing certain things. So one of those things is implementing minimum targets for affordable housing. So that's something that we're working on to refine at the county level. And certainly we can have discussions around maybe how that translates to the local level. We can support that range of mix of housing through what we permit in our planning framework. And it also notes there we're facilitating, and I'd suggest perhaps there's some meaning that can be unpacked around what that role maybe looks like, is how do we facilitate that type of housing. We also are charged with promoting densities and efficiently using land and resources in considering those planning functions and the housing we create. And then we're meant to also support any transit investments that have been made in our planning decisions, or we're not undermine them. Next slide, please. So there's a role. And I guess part of the conversation today is I did want to talk a little bit about structure as well. And so this illustration is meant to show loosely how we coordinate right now around the issues of housing supply and affordability. So on the right-hand side of that slide, you'll note that housing manager role embedded in community services at the county. They operate under the Housing and Homelessness Plan. That is a mandated document required by the province. And we're just at the beginning of a 10-year cycle with that plan, so it is in the process of being updated. That plan largely focuses around that social and subsidized housing supply, as well as homelessness supports and diversion. On the other side of the slide, the left-hand side, under planning and in coordination and alignment with our economic development staff, we have developed the Housing Action Plan. That was endorsed by County Council in its current form in 2023. And that largely focuses on planning policy, permissions, our application processes, financial tools and incentives we may be empowered to offer, consideration of surplus lands and how we could perhaps put those to use for housing purposes. But in both cases, collaboration and partnerships are applicable, and some of the ways that we did that work done. In 2023, with endorsement of the Housing Action Plan, we did also create an affordable housing community of practice at the staff level. And so that Community of Practice has now been meeting every other month. Sounds familiar. He's joined us with that as well. And we get together at both local level and those county staff to have a discussion around implementation of these plans and related matters around housing supply and that range of housing. But I do want to note at the bottom of the slide, of course, there are a whole host of other actors within our communities that would have an interest in housing, perhaps quite a vested interest in housing. And I think it's important to note that they likely also hold solutions that could be brought to bear in terms of providing that good range of housing opportunity in our communities. And so I'll speak to it a little bit later, but just I did want to highlight that through some of the strategy work that we'll be doing a little later this year, we do anticipate that we'll address or discuss kind of the interface that we see for go forward in terms of how do we coordinate with those local players in community, and are there any communication structures, for example, that we need to set up to maintain those good communications with those folks as well. So one of the things that I think has been growing in terms of its reference or framing for the housing supply issues that we're facing is this idea of affordable housing as community infrastructure. And so I think that's a useful framing for us. This is something that came up in a big way through consultations around the county's economic development master plan, that employers of all different types are struggling to fill certain roles or to retain employees because they are unable to find housing or transit to that housing, or some combination of those factors. And I think, when we look through that affordable housing lens, with that workforce idea in mind, we can see, right, that having that supply of housing to support our workforce is an important part of keeping our economy running and moving. And where we don't, I guess, address the supply adequately, the outputs or outcomes of that lack of housing as infrastructure for our community will become apparent, is becoming apparent, and that is playing out at the local level, right? It's in our wheelhouse. So it really, I think, perhaps helps us frame that as a conversation between how proactive or reactive do we want to be to this circumstance. And lucky for us, there are a broad range of actions that we could undertake at the local level to support this work. But of course, our context and capacities vary from place to place. So I think that's important to note as well. Next slide, please. So to that idea of what is our capacity? What are our capacities? How do we engage? I just wanted to kind of give an illustration of where maybe our agency and discretion kind of sits within the framework that we operate in. And so I've identified on the left-hand side the Planning Act framework as one example of the legislative framework we live in, the Ontario Municipal Act and associated framework on the other side of that slide. The municipal structure under that act, right, it lays out a lot of our key accountabilities, tools and authorities that we have for structure in broad strokes. On the Planning Act side, it's a very policy-driven system that we need to operate in. But in between that, we certainly do have some leeway in the way that we choose to do things. And oftentimes, it's not uncommon to see local municipalities, either corporately or at a local departmental level, creating strategy and policy to guide their operations, developing vision and mission statements to really target in on what's important here locally. So that's one way that we express that discretion. And through all of our choices and decisions, right, around resourcing, around the programs we choose to offer, on the procedures that we put into place, how we enforce our regulatory framework, and the environment that we create in our organizations for innovation and for continual improvement in our approaches. And I think, I guess really what I wanted to introduce here as well is the idea that we can be incredibly clever with the way that we exercise this discretion and agency. And so I'd like to introduce the idea of multi-solving at this point in time, because housing is not the only issue that we are looking at as a broad issue that we're trying to address through our work. Climate readiness, climate change readiness is another consideration. And so, for example, through a community improvement plan. We might incent energy efficiency or durable building materials through that climate lens, but by happy accident or the design, that does also have an impact on the life cycle operating costs of a building where we've made those interventions. So I guess I just wanted to put that out there as a thought to hold on to as you think about how you might like to engage around the issues, in that, you know, we can try and endeavor to find those opportunities for a twofer, to use our resources in a very clever way. Next slide, please. So we've had some good ideas. Where the rubber hits the road, a little bit of guidance or a framework to work within sometimes helps. And so the county has prepared the Housing Action Plan. As I noted, it was adopted in 2023, and that plan is available on the county website for download if you'd like to dig in. But largely the actions that are identified there look at streamlining our processes, so doing that developer planning authority role in a much smoother way. Actions to build our capacities and various types of capacities to engage around providing this fulsome range of housing, and then actions to grow our affordable unit supply specifically. Next slide, please. And because we are looking across that fulsome income spectrum, that full range of housing options, we did want to highlight that we are addressing within this plan kind of those two interrelated challenges. The Housing and Homelessness Plan really looks at that subsidized housing piece, but local government will not be able, given our current resourcing, to do it all. And so I think there are other tools, and Marilyn will speak about some of them, that we can look at to address that more deeply affordable need in our communities beyond social housing, as well as the need just generally for market housing and near market rate housing through missing middle, gentle density types of interventions. So the tools to get to these outcomes are a little bit different. So we just wanted to highlight that in terms of our focus. Next, please. That plan does take a systems view. So again, housing as an output of all of the system and the levers that we can align towards our outputs that we would like to see. These are adaptive social and economic systems that we're working within. So I think, again, important to keep in mind all of those other factors that influence as we go, and the need to monitor our progress and change tack as needed. We have identified that plan as having a collaborative focus, so leadership or collaboration or coordination roles for the county, but in terms of actions, those would be distributed across organizations and sectors locally. And that would be a living document as well. Like I say, we may need to evolve as we go as circumstances change. Next slide, please. Again, you've had the slides, so I won't go into too much detail here, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot so you could see what is embedded within that Housing Action Plan. You know, I think what's identified in there currently is not so far outside of our usual, but it really is I think more about just thinking strategically around the outputs that we're trying to achieve, which is that fulsome range, and making sure that we are carrying out our roles in a really efficient and streamlined way. We will be doing some additional work to build upon the actions that are identified currently in the plan as well. Next slide, please. So I'll speak about some of those additional actions just as I close. We've got a few more slides to go. I did want to get to that local picture. And so we've certainly got the Housing Action Plan at that regional kind of umbrella level, but how does that play out here in Georgian Bluffs? And so just a few data points just to build a bit of a picture. So the first point there, just regarding household income. So the median household income here is $94,000 a year, that's pre-tax. And median, just as a refresher, means that that is the middle point of the income spectrum. So half of households would have an income above that, and half of households would have an income below that point. I've provided a comparison just to Grey County overall and Owen Sound. And I will note that in terms of household income, Georgian Bluffs is second only to Town of Blue Mountains in terms of our regional comparators. So just to keep that in mind. And I think in terms of the household distribution between rental and ownership, Georgian Bluffs also has the largest proportion of ownership housing of any Grey County municipality, and the least proportion of rental. And thinking of that Owen Sound number, I think that's quite interesting, right? We're completely the inverse. So wealthy focus on ownership, whereas they have the lowest household income and the largest proportion of rental housing. So just some context, I think, to keep in mind as we go. With respect to affordability, so we do have some figures around what is deemed as affordable by the province for Grey County. And for those 4th to 6th decile household incomes, which are kind of middle income households, affordable would be identified as $357,000 for an ownership unit or $1,460 a month for a rental unit. And I don't have great rental statistics because we don't have a huge supply to pull that data from here. But in terms of ownership pricing, again, the median value, we can see that there is a disconnect, right, in terms of the housing and the pricing that is available and the household incomes to support accessing that housing. And just that final point, there are some households in Georgian Bluffs that would be effectively stuck. And so what I mean by that is that they are in poor housing need, and the definitions around that mean that they would not have adequate household income to access another unit elsewhere in the municipality given the price points. So just something to keep in mind as well as we look at potential solutions. But I did want to just pause and say affordable and a range of housing options. I think sometimes we have a picture in our head of what that must look like. And so I think what people often go to is the idea of a dense, multi-residential rental building. That seems to be what people just harken to mind when they think of that. And I guess I would just like to suggest that expanding the range of housing options in Georgian Bluffs perhaps may not look like that. I think given the lay of the community, where your settlement areas are located, your proximity to the regional center of Owen Sound, there is the opportunity to look at perhaps gentler density, perhaps opportunities to look at kind of those areas around Owen Sound as a natural evolution for suburban growth, perhaps at a slightly denser level. I just wanted to kind of get that idea there that there could be some synergies in that relationship with your surrounding communities. We don't need to be all things to everybody. We are seeking complete communities, but I think we do have to also respect our context. And so I just wanted to note that, I'm not suggesting high density multi-residential everywhere. It really is trying to find that, to broaden that range of affordability across the housing spectrum. Next slide, please. Okay, so local actions. So I think our suggestion and what we're seeing other municipalities undertake is to take a look at that housing action plan to identify any of the actions in there that might resonate with you in terms of improvements or streamlining or attention that you may like to give those issues. We have also prepared a document called How Can Your Municipality Help? Just for general audiences. That kind of throws out some ideas around actions that you might take. And again, none of those are necessarily, maybe it's funding housing, but there's a whole lot that kind of comes up to and before that. Learning alongside, for example, setting out kind of the plan on how we'll deliver on or build on the housing action plan at the county level, considering all of the incentives that we currently offer and if there is an opportunity to do some of that multi-solving in those offerings, exploring collaboration, and then using our advocacy voices as well. That is a document we've shared through to the clerk, so can be made available to you as well. Next slide, please. And then just briefly, almost there, in terms of our go forward, this is a year study for the county. So economic development is definitely in a steady year, planning as well. And so we are currently just into the update to our growth management strategy. That work, we've retained Hemson Consulting to support us with that. That's the process by which we do the demographic and trend analysis to determine growth allocations to Grey County and to each of the member municipalities. So that's ongoing. Our intention is to roll some of that data into a housing needs assessment to follow that work. Through that, we'll be able to look a little bit at that supply and demand and gap analysis at different price points and housing types to be able to offer some more nuanced recommendations or suggestions in terms of where we might want to focus our efforts into delivering that fulsome range of housing. And then we'll take our learnings from the past 3 years and also from those data exercises and pull that into some additional strategy writing, which I anticipate will feed back into further updates to the Housing Action Plan as we go. Next slide, please. Okay, and so just by means of summary and segue, perhaps, I did want to offer you my cutesy graphic, which really tries to illustrate where we're headed, which is, municipalities, our structure, interfacing with those networked community players, such that we end up where housing and our common goals around housing are centered and we're each able to take in with the solutions we can bring to bear. We're fortunate in Grey County to have a very engaged community sector. And so as one example of organizations working in that space, the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay has been doing a lot of learning and networking work around these issues. And so I think as a thinking partner, that's been great to have somebody on the other side of the desk looking at that alignment piece. But they are looking at somewhat different solutions or expanded solutions beyond perhaps what we can offer in our structure. And so Marilyn is here today as well and will follow me with a presentation around some of that work, taking into the discussion and presentation I've offered. Next slide, please. So I'll leave it there, and certainly we're happy to address any questions and ideas that you might like to share at this point in time when Marilyn presents as well. I think the way it's played out when we've presented other places is sometimes we end up tagging in non-questions together, which we're happy to do because there is that alignment. And I'll just finally note that in the slide deck I shared and in your package, there were a few additional slides. I'd included those for reference. If you'd attended the counselor training session we held in 2023, those came from that session. They are my graphics that I drew, so they are maybe not so polished, but anyways, they are there as a reference for you and really try to get at some of the factors that go into the life cycle costs of a building and illustrating where our influence applies in that as well. So just an added piece, but we just didn't think we'd have time to kind of go through that in detail today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz, for the presentation. There was a lot of information in that package, and thank you for that. Does anybody have a direct question for Liz right now, or shall we? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Day.
Thank you for your presentation. It's a topic I think a lot about and see the need for with the people I work with my other job. I really appreciate the broader ideas presented and can stand behind those. And I also struggle to find the practical, actionable items within all the bigger ideas that got presented at these meetings sometimes. So specifically for Georgian Bluffs, I have questions about locations that are suitable for the development of affordable housing. I think about transportation, access to a grocery store, bikeability, walkability, and I see limitations on some of our communities in being able to provide those things. I also have, there's a lot of policy within the township, and I will admit that I have not read every word of it. So if there are sections of our policy that are preventing developers or creating a barrier for developers to choose affordable housing, I would love if those could be identified for us so that we could work on changing those to be more inviting.
No, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for that. And yeah, it's, I think the translation from the broad ideas to the specific actions is where we really hope that the Housing Action Plan might help in that regard, because I think when people talk about affordable housing, they're often thinking shovels in the ground. And yes, that is obviously part of what we're trying to achieve. But I think there are kind of those background factors that need to be in place to facilitate that housing to materialize. Now, part of it is an economic systems problem, and Marilyn can speak to that a little bit more. What we're hearing is that to get a project through the process, constructed at an affordable price point is nearly impossible for market developers. And through the learning that we've done, we really understand that kind of a stacking of resources approach to those types of projects, those more deeply affordable projects, are necessary. So it's grants, it's loans, it's incentive programs, it's community bonds, perhaps, all stacking those resources together to get to a point where you can build and that output is affordable at the level that we need. So part of it is, I guess, discerning maybe how we might engage as municipal organizations around some of those financial systems shifts that will be required. But you're right, like affordable housing, especially that more deeply affordable housing, it's affordable in the context where there are wraparound services, where there's transit, where there's walkability to meet the needs of those households and their income. And so that, I think there may be opportunities to include a component of that in development in Georgian Bluffs. ARUs, for example, might be one opportunity on a small scale as a component of a mixed affordability development. I think you might see some affordable units potentially being achieved in that way. But like I say, I don't necessarily foresee it being kind of that large scale, multi-residential, deeply affordable type of housing product here. I do think there is opportunity to look at areas, for example, like Brook, in terms of the opportunity for that gentle density and not necessarily deeply affordable housing, but perhaps more affordable than market housing. And oftentimes the driver there is density. So looking at using that land efficiently, looking at using any resourcing for servicing efficiently to service that development. And so it's increments, not necessarily straight to shovels. And so I think I would encourage, and I'm happy to have further discussion around the Housing Action Plan and how we start to embed that. But again, thinking of all of the factors that are influencing that housing output, when we look at what is in our scope of control, it is the planning system and how we administer that and what our timeframes look like. It is our servicing decisions and what's available and when, and is that timely relative to development. The actual built form comes about in the affordability because we've created that framework for that housing to be created. Leave that there. Thank you.
Councilor Colburn.
Thank you, and through you to our speaker, I appreciate your words as well. I would echo much of what Councillor Day has said, along with the barriers that she's mentioned is infrastructure. So we have very few areas that are fully serviced, and that really limits us. And so sometimes when we look at infilling opportunities, then we are met with resistance and NIMBYism. So it often feels like some solutions we do have, the community isn't necessarily behind. So that would be another struggle, I would say, of ours. And if you go further upstream, it's the affordability to be able to expand on our servicing and infrastructure, because we can barely afford to maintain and plan for our current infrastructure, never mind putting in new infrastructure. So I'm happy to see we have a county-wide approach. And you're right, I suspect our goal will not be high density, deeply affordable homes, but something that's at least more attainable. I believe, I'm looking at Mr. Benner, I believe we're looking at an OP and zoning bylaw refurbishment. And so hopefully we'll see some nuggets in there that help us achieve those goals. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, thanks for the presentation. Stay close by. We may need you again shortly, but we'll move on to 6.1.2, the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay, Affordable Housing. And Marilyn, welcome. And have your presentation.
Thank you. It's lots of fun following this. We get to, one of the good things about this particular volunteer opportunity for me is working so closely with Liz. We've had a lot of fun. Thinking about how you put a hierarchy, like a county, and a set of hierarchies like municipalities, together with the flock of starlings that might be your nonprofit sector. Yeah. So we are going to go to the first slide. Go up. The first slide. That's the third one. Should be one before that. Yeah, bingo. Okay. We're hosted by the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay, but we are by no means Collingwood affiliated. I live in Georgian Bluffs, know many of you. And I facilitate this group with Jack Vanderkoy, who is the chair of the task force on housing in Collingwood. So we're all volunteers, all our members, including municipal councillors, housing advocates, really ordinary people trying to learn our way forward to what our community solutions might be to the housing crisis. We're an open group. There's no criteria for admission except that if your eyes light up, you're in. That's all it takes. And that's actually worked very well. I think Liz and I were just chatting about how long we've been alive. I think it's probably 4 years working through this particular problem in our community. We've had a good look at local and national housing data to understand the problem. And we've also looked at successful community initiatives in all over Canada, really, and particularly in Ontario. And there are some trends there in what communities are doing to solve this problem. We share our learning through the Institute hosts our events. They have a newsletter, which I urge you to sign up for. It's often got our stuff in it. And they host an affordable housing toolkit, which is where we share our learning. And there you will find Liz's brand new piece on what your municipality can do to help, as we all struggle to figure out just what are the mechanics of municipal decision-making that could be slanted towards affordability and the housing crisis solution. So in November of 2023, we held a housing forum in Meaford. I don't know if any of you were able to be there, but we had 130 or 40 people there. We hosted then an afternoon where we really asked if we were 10 times bolder and more collaborative, what would we be doing as a region? And that report of that conversation is up on the Institute's website in the toolkit. And now you will also find what we did with that, which is, as a community organization, create a community approach to affordable community housing, a whole community approach. What if it wasn't just up to municipalities in the county, but in fact the whole community was working in this area? And so that's a major piece I want to share with you today, is how we integrate the various different parts of our system. So now that lovely system slide. So understanding first that the shortage of affordable housing is a systems problem. It's not a shortage of shovels in the ground. Yvonne Hamlin, who's now the mayor of Collingwood, but was one of our councillor members at the time, said, all right, when do we put a shovel in the ground? So we thought about that a lot. We spent time with Social Innovation Canada's Financialization of Housing Lab with CMHC, people all across Canada trying to figure this thing out as well. And what we learned is that there's really no shortage of shovels to go in the ground, right? That's not the problem. Collingwood's still working, getting a shovel in the ground. Our current system is actually working really quite well for some. And locally, you can see it in the landscape. You can see it in real estate profit data. And you can see also where it's not working so well. And so recently when we spoke to, Liz and I spoke to Meaford Council, we did a deputation there. Councillor Tony Bell, who's a machinist, he thought about this for a long time. And at the end of all the questions and answers, he went back to this slide in his mind and he said, the cogs and the sprockets are all there. We just don't have them lined up to be most effective. That's really the nut of what we've been working at. A system only produces the outcomes it's designed to create. This is not like a forest. This is a human design system. We have created it to produce exactly the kind of results it produces, and it does that repeatedly. It's mechanics, really. If you change the system, you change the outcome. And so we spent the last 3 years, I guess, focused on understanding how our local system was working and where some of the opportunities for solution would be. And as Stuart Reed, the Community Foundation's member of our group, said, nobody's coming to save us. It really is up to us to figure this out. So one of the first things we learned is that we're hampered in our community by scale. We have so many smaller municipalities that we can't solve this one by each. The opportunity is in regional collaboration. And we now have not just Grey County, which has been fabulous with us, but Simcoe, that corner, representing that corner of Simcoe that is engaged with us, and also increasingly Bruce County. So that's been really helpful to be able to see not only what could we do thinking about as a region, but also if one region begins an innovation, tries it out, we can share that information and other counties can pick that up. So next slide, please. The whole of Canada is really in the grips of this systems crisis. We didn't create it, but it's ours to deal with. We really have some aspects that are unique to smaller communities, and you may have noticed that most of the initiatives are going into big communities. It's really hard as a small community to get CMHC funding, for example. So our real estate's been a bargain, and we saw a wave of in-migration from cities during the pandemic as boomers retire or are here part-time, or investors owning multiple homes, as I know that's something we've dealt with in Georgian Bluffs. We're a community of many small independent municipalities, each with our own development goals in a rapidly shifting market. There's real advantages to that. You don't build in Georgian Bluffs what you might build in Owen Sound, but there's also advantages to looking at how do we function as a region. It's a pretty nice place to live here, but many of us work in the lower waged employment. In fact, our local regional economy relies on retail, healthcare, hospitality, and tourism. Those folks are the lower wage service industries. And I tell you, I got into housing not because I knew anything about housing when I started, but my kids all work in retail and healthcare, PSWs and dietary aids and that sort of thing. So I thank Grandma. Subsidizes their rent from time to time when they fall short. I know exactly how difficult this it is for people. And these are not people on the street. These are working people, right? So we also have a workforce with very little public transit or ability to move. And that's critical for a community like ours. So the big pressure point regionally is on lower priced housing, both rental and ownership, both of those things. Canada has a measurable affordable housing definition. That's what Liz is using to do her calculations. 30% of gross income for all housing costs. And that data pegged to income rather than market pricing is the way that we need to be tracking our success or failure as a community in housing our population. As housing costs increase faster than wages, working families have less available to spend in local business, 20% less. If you look at the BMO pre-pandemic, post-pandemic data, that's huge. It's probably more now. And as our workforce becomes less mobile and employment in the service industry starts to become a problem. So we're talking community sustainability here in our region. Next, please. So data helps. This slide sort of mirrors the data that Liz shared with you about Georgian Bluffs. This is based on an idea that came out of our group called the Affordability Matrix, where we began to look at how we pegged housing affordability not to market conditions, not to attainable housing, as this is one of the things that got dreamed up, but more to actually what people in the community need to be able to live well in the community. And Liz has done this for most, well, I guess all the deputations and presentations we've done to municipalities. So we have a nice collection of these slides. Median income and local rental rates and development conditions are different from municipality to municipality. And so by looking across these different municipalities, we can see the benefits of a regional approach. I live on Churchside Road, but like most, I travel to Owen Sound for my shopping, my healthcare, and my entertainment. So those lower income service folks, that problem that Owen Sound has is also ultimately a problem for us, particularly as our population ages. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you a quick peek. This is the deputation slide we used for Owen Sound. You can see that it's very different. It's very different. If you look at Town of Blue Mountains and Meaford, you'll see that those two are very different as well. Georgian Bluffs is the second wealthiest community in Grey County. Town of Blue Mountains is the first. And yet our service population, our service workers are living in those other communities, but we're all eating in the restaurants, going to the dentist there, all those kinds of things. So really this is for comparison and the idea that looking across at what our neighbors are experiencing is part of lining up the cogs and sprockets for the best outcome in community. Now, what we want to do is link county, municipal, and community sectors together. Now I'll talk a bit about what the community sector would have to offer in this problem. Next slide, please. I'll just say also, homelessness is an urgent crisis. We maybe don't see it so much in Georgian Bluffs, but that most visible part of that crisis is affordable housing. It doesn't take much to drop from being a PSW in a rental accommodation. In fact, my own kids, it's a better deal to work in Meaford long-term care. They live in Owen Sound. We figured out what the cost would be. It would cost them a 60% increase in rent to move to Meaford. Not because it's more expensive to live in Meaford, but because they've been for 4 years in the place they were in. And rentals have got skyrocketed. So next slide. So in our learning, and we've had a lot of really interesting events and discussions. Market developers, as Liz said, are telling us that they can't build to what working families need. They can't do it. Liz talked sometimes recently about it being about asking a goldfish to climb a tree. We've worked really hard at getting commercial developers to build affordably. Not going there, not going to happen. So that's one problem. The second is that municipalities have responsibility for development approvals, but often don't see what the income levels are for workforce housing in the employees either that live in the vicinity or live in a region close, and we need to rely on them as our service workers. The third is a lack of access to development capital. It's much harder in a small community than in a big community. If you trim the margins on small developments to make it more affordable, it makes it really difficult to compete both for funding and for financing. We're seeing that particularly with CMHC and the non-market nonprofit sector, but I'll explain in a sec. Also, the approval processes are slow, and time is money in the development world. So we have 1 or 2 developers who are working towards affordable thresholds for purchase, and they're dying on the vine trying to get through the approval systems because of the amount of time that it takes. That's something we could fix, right? That's something we could do. Next. Yeah, you're there. Yeah, that one. So this is the whole community approach. 3 components: support increased capacity in our non-market developers. If the goldfish won't do it, let's use the folks we know, and we have a lot of them in our community. We've just done a survey. Focus municipal development and county policy on affordability. Liz has done, there's lots of good stuff in the Grey County housing policy, but we can do it locally as well. It's a 2-part system. And finally, foster a social finance strategy that will assist with the lack of access to capital. Next slide. This is the housing continuum that CMHC develops. So just to be clear on what non-market affordable housing is, the housing that the county provides that Liz is talking about is at the subsidized end. Commercial market, whether it is condos or the McMansions out in field in various places, or nice little bungalows like mine backed up against the escarpment, that's commercial market. What non-market affordable housing is housing that traditionally has been operated on a nonprofit basis. So it is offered as co-ops, as non-profit housing. We're watching churches in some places turn their facilities, one in Hanover thinking about doing this. Southgate's looking at its town hall, wondering if it could be housing. Markdale's looking at the old hospital, wondering if it might be housing. Those are all done by groups like ours. They're just volunteer community organizations that learn how to do this. Next slide. So where the fastest solution here for us is to increase this non-market housing through rental, lower income rental. Where that's being done in other communities, either by build or purchase, it actually creates a community-owned housing that's held intentionally as affordable by mission. So if a nonprofit goes out of business, it must put its assets into another nonprofit with the same kind of mission. It can't be sold for Dairy Queen. So it's affordable by mission rather than market, and that means it's affordable in perpetuity. Ottawa Housing Co-op Land Trust is doing some amazing work here that we could take a close look at, and we have in our group. Next. It might be, just thinking about the conversation a minute ago about, we don't want higher density, low market, affordable right in Georgian Bluffs, may not be appropriate. But what could be is, as part of a system, to have lower cost purchasing available, smaller homes, entry-level homes, homes for seniors to retire into when they're looking for something small, rather than the condo market. And what that does is it brings a family into the community that is committed to community building. It helps them to build equity for the future, and it also frees up those lower cost rental units that people are in currently. And that might be something to really think about. Next slide. So we need, sorry, you're just one ahead of me, which means must be a signal I should go faster. What we want our municipalities to do is put a priority on affordable development. Figure out what happens when you make that a priority and decide to contribute. Use the data-driven tools so that you can identify what affordability requirements are for this municipality, but also as part of a region. Use efficient development practices and use your concessions for things that address affordability. And Liz has a great document on what they might be. Collaboration for learning to scale, to take a regional approach, and engage with social finance opportunities. Next slide. Almost done. And this is the newest part. To attract capital that we don't have access to, we want us to look at how we mobilize the financing that our community already has. So unlike urban centers with large nonprofits and alternative financing opportunities, most of our community wealth is actually invested in our municipalities. So you are the stakeholders that hold the most of community wealth. There's also private wealth. So a community wealth strategy looks at how we mobilize that to greater community benefit. This is a movement that's really strong in the UK, it's growing in the US, but the housing crisis is really propelling it forward. It's the most interesting conversation in Canada. We know here how to buy local and why that might be important, but what we don't know is how to lend and invest for community benefit. And so that is the piece that the non-market housing sector is figuring out right now, and great to tune into. So you may have heard about community bonds. There are $111 million worth of community bonds in nonprofits for housing in Canada right now through a single provider. Surplus and donated lands. Ottawa holds a land trust. We're looking at building one here so that lands could be donated or earmarked by a municipality as surplus without the municipality actually having to figure out the development stuff. We'll put that in a trusted charitable organization that can look across the region and see what the best opportunities are. Charitable lending, our community foundation is 2 weeks from now in Halifax talking about how they're exploring charitable lending. They're a vanguard and we're happy to have them as long-term members of our group. Leveraging community-owned assets. Lots of community organizations own buildings that can be mortgaged and leveraged for development. That's exactly what developers do, but we're just not used to working with loans in charitable sector. So we're working on that. We'd love to see a regional housing investment fund. There's one in Hamilton just been developed. We can tap into their expertise, where municipalities and counties and private investors have an opportunity to invest in a regional fund that gets these things off the ground. You may know St. Francis Place in Owen Sound. They are building St. Clair's Place. It's taken 7 years to get through that process. That's a lack of access to capital for startup. And social procurement, and that's when we spend our municipal money in ways that multiplies the benefit. That's Liz's multi-solving. So there's a developer in Barrie that would love to come and work with us that actually uses trades students under supervision to work in non-market builds. So young people are moving into the trades, they have experience under a licensed tradesperson, but they're also building non-market housing. That's a twofer. Yeah. So last slide. This is the whole community approach to affordability. This is if not just the county, not just the county and the municipalities, but the county, the municipalities, and the community, where all those sprockets and gears aligned in a single strategy. We'd have to build some things. And so we are working right now on a community of practice of non-market developers. We know where they are. There's 38 of them between Gray, Bruce, and that corner of Simcoe we work in. We have regional citizens groups in a number of communities working with their municipalities on how to think about this. We're looking to build a land trust organization to hold those surplus lands and also accept donated lands that could be used for affordable housing in one way or another. We're building an anchor housing organization. This part's getting really exciting. We have a guy who's actually very experienced in this, and we're starting to figure out how the heck we put that together into a nonprofit organization for our region. And we're also have a very dynamic group right now working on what a community wealth strategy would look like. How would we actually mobilize some of these kinds of different kinds of financing in our community? That's a very lively group. Meets one lunch hour once a month. If anybody wants to join in, you'd be more than welcome there. That's it. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Marilyn. Maybe some questions for you, or for Marilyn and Liz. I'll turn it over to council. Anybody have any question they'd like to ask? Yes, go, Councilor David.
Okay. Mainly, I want to say thank you. I'm always amazed by the volunteer work that happens in our communities, and I know how much effort and time that consumes, and I appreciate very much the work that you're doing. I just also wanted to add the perspective that for a lot of Georgian Bluffs, we definitely rely on the urban center of Owen Sound. And with that thinking, if it's ever relevant, the northern part of the municipality has a similar relationship with Wyerton. So comparing the data for that part of Bruce County as well could be useful in our future.
Absolutely. And we have Bruce County county members now at our table. I recently did a deputation in, or it was a public speak, I guess, in Tobermory, and they've joined in. So North Bruce is in, and we've just been invited to do something around community wealth in sort of Port Elgin, Southampton area. So it feels like a virus that's spreading. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Councilor Thompson.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
That's all right.
I want to thank you too. I think that this is really interesting, and given my background in social work and in this community for so long, it is really, really important. I am sharing something from my colleague, Councillor Moore Colburn, talking about thinking about our municipality. And when I think about the framework of our municipality, we're in between a bunch of small urban and town boundaries. And when I think about the opportunities for affordable housing, I think in terms of volume and scale, and it challenges us. So since we don't have services and we don't really have a lot of our land is rural or agricultural, I think about a great presentation. If there was one thing we could do, what would it be? Like if you were to say, this is the one thing that's the most important that you could do that's helpful, what would it be? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. I just.
Okay, I'm not sure I would be correct in knowing the one thing, but I did have a big think in as we developed this, because I live, you know, on Churchside Road, the Sarawak town line. There's not likely to be our apartment development there. But when I think about the young people that I know that would love to escape so often substandard, affordable housing in Owen Sound, I think that entry into ownership is something that a community like this might really have some thought into. So one of the social finance mechanisms that I'm thinking about and watching really closely are charitable equity mortgages. So if you're paying, as my kids are, $1,600 a month on a, you know, retail or healthcare salary, you're not putting aside money much to get in. And it feels like that's going to be a large problem by the time they're my age and having to rely on their savings to live. And I wonder what a community like ours might do with single family dwellings that are well designed, are energy efficient, are, sure you need a car, but have some kind of assisted mortgage to be able to get in. I really wonder about something like that. And as a wealthy community, we talked to, like somebody mentioned NIMBYism. One of the things that we discovered from other communities, Halliburton notably, Collingwood more recently, is when people invest in a community bond to support affordable housing, NIMBYism drops. Collingwood's just organizing a YIMBYism week, yes, in my backyard. Halliburton, which, you know, is a lovely community, not a wealthy community, they found they could raise $800,000 in a couple of months one summer to balance the books of their affordable housing program. It was not even for a direct build, but what they found is that social capital increased. People felt committed to the community. They had a chance to give back the kind of rural things that, you know, most of us who spent a lot of time here grew up with. It's really an opportunity. So I wonder about a charitable mortgage fund that could be operated by a nonprofit that could assist people to get into single family dwellings. You know, shared services is something that Meaford is thinking about. So there's a good well and a good septic system, but it serves 4 houses, 3 houses, just how that kind of thing can operate. If you think about Shallow Lake and you think about Kilsyth, maybe there we're looking at 4plexes, 6plexes. Maybe we're looking at conversions, you know, some of those big old houses that can become triplexes. And those things may actually be more suitable than an ADU, ADR.
Any further questions? I did have one just question. I'll try and see if I can get it out the way I want it to come out. With the talk of recession coming in the next 6 to 8 months, whenever it's going to be, do you feel that with the plan that you've got in place now or the program that you want to put in play now, with the recession coming, will that help or hinder what you want to do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that we've labored with through this is the tension between making a plan and following it and shifting to existing circumstances as they change, right? We started during the pandemic and it's very different. So I think having these structures will help us to pivot with what happens next. So, and also linking our current non-market developers, that expertise into something that we could depend on and recognize and put a priority on in terms of municipal development will help. So will it buffer recession? I tell you, I've been in a meeting on the community development organization trying to figure out how we get that going and what's the right path and, you know, what will ensure it's people's acceptance of it. I feel with this new government that we should be moving very quickly on these kind of recommendations. I think 8 months from now, we may see new and different things, but we've got to start where we are. And to me, that's about helping to build out the structures and the municipal engagement in the problem. So that as we have the it's all relational work, right? As we have the relationships, we might say, well, you know, let's take a quarter turn on that idea and go this way instead. And the other buffer is we're not alone in this. I've been asked as one of the co-chairs to sit on 2 national tables in the last 6 months as communities across Canada try and figure this out. They're not linked. There's no, you know, fancy coalition and smaller communities like ours are underrepresented. So we need to be in those places learning, because Ottawa, Hamilton, Haliburton, Toronto, those places are richer than us, more streamlined than us, and ahead of us in the thinking. But boy, we can harvest those ideas and implement them here. We've got the will.
Further questions? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks, Liz, for your presentations tonight. It's very, a lot of knowledge there. So thank you very much for coming tonight. All right, 6.2 is delegations on agenda items. Any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item on the agenda must register with the clerk's office. To register, you can complete the online delegation form, www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations, or call the clerk's office 519-376-2729, extension 601, or register in council chambers with the clerk prior to the meeting start time of 5 p.m. tonight. Public inquiries. Any person who wishes to appear before council with a question or inquiry must register with the clerk's office. Registration number 1, you can complete online delegation form, www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations, or call the clerk's office 519-376-2729, extension 601, or register in council chambers with the clerk prior to the meeting start time of 5 p.m. And we have none. Recommendation reports. It's the only one of the night. Corporate services 7.1.1, COR 2025-020. 2024 reserve and reserve fund transfers and estimated 2024 surplus. Recommendation reads that council approve the annual transfer to from reserves and reserve funds accounts to detailed herein, and the council approve any 2024 operating surplus to a transfer as follows: 25% to the climate change reserve and 75% to the roads reserve. I need a mover or a seconder. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Day, and Samantha. You're up.
Thank you, and through you, back in December of 2024, we had updated our reserve and reserve fund policy. One of the requirements of that policy is to present each year a report to council outlining the proposed reserve fund transfers in and out of reserves, which is what this report is hoping to fulfill. Our auditors do request that you approve the transfers as part of their year-end audit work as well, which is why that is reflected in the motion. When looking at our 2024 reserve and reserve fund transfers, they're outlined in Appendix A. Overall, the majority of the unaudited balances do fall in line with your thresholds that were set within the reserve and reserve fund policy. There are 2 that fall out of that thresholds. The first one is the IT hardware and software. Staff have identified it is overfunded at this time. We're not recommending a change, as through 2025, we are looking at enhancing and gathering more information about what assets we have around that, as we feel the annual requirement may be understated, as assets may be missing within our capital listing, that it's that they got expensed throughout a year opposed to capitalized. We also have our roads reserve, which is shown as being underfunded by approximately $1.4 million. Again, we are not recommending any changes at this time. There is an upcoming special council meeting in, I believe, June, where you're going to be discussing current and proposed levels of service. Part of what we hope to come out of that meeting will influence what the roads reserve should be along with others, depending on what levels of service you wish to provide to residents and what they can expect. So at this time, we're not recommending any transfers to have that reserve put in line with its target balances. On the appendix, the two items in red for under the transfer of surplus column being 260,272 to the roads reserve and 86,757 to your climate change. Those represent the second part of the recommendation we have in front of you, being 25% of the estimated, again, unaudited surplus going to your climate change reserve and your roads reserve. When we look at how is that surplus, what is driving that surplus, we have a few items being we earned more income than what we had budgeted for our taxation revenue. This is driven by our supplementals, which are tax bills that are issued in a year that can go backwards for development that occurred the previous 2 years. So if a house was built in 2023, they may not have been taxed in 2023 for additional taxation revenue on the build. They might have received that invoice in 2024, which is why it is reported as 2024 revenue. We also earned additional investment income over what we had budgeted. That's linked to the high prime rates that were experienced. We had additional penalty and interest income that was charged on outstanding balances and user fees. The majority of the user fee increase was driven by our additional usage at our facilities for the programming that is provided at them. We also had a couple underspent expenditures, mostly around council. That was savings identified in the professional development and fleet identified through fuel. With every underspent, there is some overspends as well. We had our training overspent, materials and supplies have went over, software licenses did go over, our planning department, and our contribution to the Katie Arena. Those were all over what we had anticipated, which decreased the amount of surplus we were anticipating. So we are looking at, after our reserve and reserve fund policy, an estimated operating surplus of $347,000.
All right, thank you, Samantha, for that. Questions from council? Thinking.
Well, it's not a question, but based on the last hour of presentations that we've had with affordable housing, homelessness, the whole bit, and we have surplus monies and we dedicate it to roads and climate change, which are important. At what point do we discuss as council that we start developing a reserve for affordability, for grants, for house? You know, we listen to that presentation and don't throw the developers under the bus. If I can build a house for $1 million and get a profit on it, or I build a house for 100,000, which way am I going to go? That's the world we're in today. So obviously subsidies are going to be a big part of it, energy efficiencies, grants for, you know, developing densities with inside houses, things like that. You know, at some point as a council, we have to start talking about that. Is that appropriate time today? Is it a service level conversation later on that we talk about starting a reserve fund for that? You know, at some point somebody's going to come to you with a surplus institutional building and say, I'd love to put affordable housing in here, but I need some help. I need some incentives. And I don't think that's all county driven. I think that's municipal driven as well. So that's my comment. I don't know where it fits into this, but it seemed like a time to bring it up.
Yep, Samantha.
We also had the direction from a previous strategic session to look at our user fees around that and incorporating some user fees around affordability. So we do also have that direction, but would be happy to take direction to look at a reserve as well.
Use your fees and affordability go hand in hand. Like, I don't want to make it any more cumbersome, any more red tape. When I hear those two words in the same sentence, it kind of says I'm alarmed, but okay.
Well, very good. Yeah, no, great points there. We have to help ourselves, right, before we can get to figure out a plan to do that. So great point for sure. Yeah, Councilor Day.
I just wanted to lend some support to the idea. I don't feel like jumping in right now
No.
doing that, but I think it's an idea worth examining, and it would I think I I appreciate all the presentation tonight and all the workshops I've been to in the past, and still am grasping for something practical to do to help make the situation better for folks.
Good comments. All right, any further comments? Not seeing any. I'm going to call the vote then. All those in favor? It's carried. Updates from members appointed to council, county council, and committees and local boards. 8.1, county council update from probably the mayor.
I do not have one this week.
Okay.
I did not manage to get that put together.
All right, that's all right.
Sorry.
It was a good meeting.
It was a good
There
meeting.
you go.
Yeah.
All right, any other boards or committees? Not seeing any. All right. We will go on to unfinished business. There is none. New business, there is none. Notice of motion. Does any member wish to provide a notice of motion or notice of discussion for consideration for the next council meeting? I am not seeing. Yep.
It's like a notice of discussion, but I think at some point in time, we need to go back at this council and look at things that have been brought forward. The council has said, we don't support this. We're waiting for staff to bring back a report on. You know, when I sit back and I reflect, I mean, a couple of examples. A year ago, we were told we needed a new tractor. Years gone by, we haven't got a new tractor. We don't know where that's at. We as council said, hey, no sole sourcing to an engineering on Old Beach Drive. It's in the 2025 budget. You know, here we are almost June. Where are we at with that? I think there's things that we just need to look at to say, are we still on track? Are the reports coming in? Is it falling off the rails? Where do we go?
Good point. Councillor Thompson.
I'll stop
Oh my
looking
goodness.
at you.
Look at him.
I think that's a good point. It's almost, it's not project-based tracking, but it's almost like action plan's not the right word, but it is execution tracking.
Yeah, there's some things that we have said, and it just seems like it's kind of fallen to the wayside to get staff turnover, workload, that sort of stuff. But I don't think we as council are doing ourselves any justice if we don't kind of track that sort of stuff a little closer. You know, where is it at? I mean, the one that I brought up, it's a year later, and here we are. And one tells me that within the next 6 months, we're going to get a report when we have an emergency. That's what we're trying to avoid, right?
So, sorry, through you, Chair, to staff, do we, Niall, you were entering the room in the middle of this discussion, so apologies, but do we track outstanding work? Do we track outstanding, what do we want to call them, items that have fallen by the wayside? There's a more succinct title than that, but do we track that? And is there a way of presenting that to us so that we all know where we're at with different things?
I can take a stab. So through you, Mayor, how I'm doing it, Councillor Thompson. Through you, Chair Pringle. Through you, Chair Pringle.
Where's that pencil beside you anyway?
It happens. Anyway, Councillor Colburn, yes, we do track. And I walked in very briefly. Some projects slip, and they slip further than we'd like them to. Some projects remain on track. Some projects remain ahead of schedule. We do track. It's going to be an action which is not going to be an action I'm going to complete in the next 2 days. But there would be. I'm sure that there are ways in which we can provide more information on the project status as it comes forward. We track outstanding actions of council, and you see those periodically, and we've tweaked that report. I'm sure that we can tweak our project update report, so perhaps there is a quarterly update or at least a quarterly or biannual update, and I will hand over to Brittany.
I just wanted to note that the first quarter update report providing the capital project update is actually coming next week. So you will see capital project updates for 2025. With that being said, we made reference to specifically to the tractor, but that is not reflected in that report as far as I believe. It is reflected in that report?
I think that is, yes.
It is, so there you go. So all of the information remains.
Thank you. Carol?
I'm looking at the clerk. Did we not just have a list in the last 6 weeks that listed all of these outstanding items?
We usually have strategic planning, do we not?
So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, I'll get it right this time. So through you, Deputy Mayor Pringle, yes, we bring a tracker. We have the green bars, so you can go back. We brought it forward, I think, last time was in the annual report. There's one that was brought forward at budget. We provide you the update on outstanding projects from previous budget. Many projects, of course, stretch over 2 budgets, and so, or more. You'll see the green tracker gives you a progress update, and there's a comment that's usually added into that. There's obviously a large number of projects that we have on at any time, so if perhaps the discussion is best placed next week when you see the tracker as to how we might be able to provide more information on the specific projects to maintain your eyesight on them. But every single capital project that you have approved is listed out on that and an update status.
Councillor Shoulders.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, this one just goes right actually back to Britt. Can you just repeat what you said about next week, about the tractor being on there? Is that on that for next week's agenda?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Does that get this information real important to council?
If it's coming next week and it's there, it's there.
Okay.
Have the discussion.
Or any other notices, discussion, or motion? Okay, not seeing none. All right, closed session, we have none. Adjournment, next regular meeting is May the 21st, 2025 at 5 p.m. If there is no other business, I'll now call for adjournment of the meeting. Need a mover and a seconder? Councilor Winters, Councilor Thompson. I'll now call the vote. All those in favor?
You can stay if you want.
Councilor Day is staying.
I just wanted to
Oh, yeah, sure. No, go ahead.
thank CAO Lobley for his work in the township and wish him best of luck in his future endeavors.
Very good. Very good. I'm coming. Yeah, okay. So we did get that passed. We did pass the vote. Al's leaving and we're now adjourned.